Welcome. We have Mark Manoil here, who is a Democratic candidate for the office of Arizona State Treasurer. And we welcome him and are interested in hearing his views and what you're going to do as State Treasurer.
Thank you, Miriam.
Okay.
I really appreciate your putting up with my being so late. I apologize for arriving late. We had a little filing we had to get to the Supreme Court this morning, and it just wouldn't get itself done fast enough. But finally got it done and hopefully we'll have justice in Arizona. It's about a tax matter, and I'm a lawyer, as you might have gathered. This is my 30th year of law practice. Most of it's been in Arizona. I spent a few years early in my career practicing law in Chicago at one of the large law firms. It's now an international law firm, but at the time it was one of the 20 largest law firms in the country. And I was doing corporate work as a young lawyer. When I came back to Arizona in 1992, corporate and banking, I should say, when I came back to Arizona, I was very interested in real estate law, and that has been more of my focus along with small business matters. The real estate law got focused on the area of property tax enforcement, and I actually wrote a book entitled Arizona Property Tax Liens Guide to Profit Protection and Prosecution, and self-published it back in 2002. It was very popular among lawyers, and I had sort of written this as my desk book for my law practice because I was representing people who were in that area. And I realized, well, this might be a good calling card for me as a young lawyer. And so I published it as a book, and then the State Bar of Arizona was the main channel of distribution. So that's 2002. I spent about 10 years working on that book. This is really not, this is a long, slow approach to the Arizona Treasurer's Office, isn't it? But my involvement in this area of practice is what brought me closer to tax and fiscal policy in our state. And my saying that I practiced law for 30 years now also communicates to you that I'm of a certain age. And so these are several factors that lead into my running for state treasurer, and that what I hope are values I can bring to the office as your next state treasurer. One is being from an old Arizona family, which I'll talk about in just a second, and being an old person old enough to have attended public schools in Phoenix, going to the public grade schools and high schools, getting a fine enough education to go to Stanford as an undergrad, and then coming back after a little break of time where I was a volunteer English teacher in Southeast Asia for a year, and did some other work. Went to law school at Arizona State University and also did an MBA at the same time. So I have a JD MBA, and the MBA, I actually thought at the time I would go into business and practice law for a few years just to get to know that and then move on. Law doesn't let you do that, so I'm still practicing law, trying to get it right. But in this law practice and in the process of writing this book, I got much closer to the legislation and the public policy in our state. Having grown up here, I've really kind of identified 1992 as a watershed year. And so when I say I'm a person of a certain age, the age I'm referring to is 1992, and having adult memories that precede 1992. And why is 1992 so significant, at least as to me? It's the year that the voters of Arizona amended the state constitution to require supermajority votes for revenue raising. I see a lot of nodding heads. So some of you are familiar with that just because you've learned of it, and others of you probably have been here long enough to also share those adult memories from 1992. This is a bit of a distinction with all of the other candidates running for this office who are younger than me. This is the first time I've been the old guy in the race. But I think it's very important for voters in Arizona to not accept that constitutional amendment as the normal state of affairs. it is a failed experiment in our state's history. And it's because of the supermajority requirement for revenue raising versus the simple, standard, traditional, historical, simple majority requirement for tax cutting that our state budget is in such trouble continuously. Because now it's very easy to cut taxes when you're pandering for votes, but it's very hard to restore bad tax cuts that didn't fulfill the mission that they were sold on. Like, for instance, the $520 million corporate income tax that was passed in, I believe, 2011, when we were in the doldrums after the Great Recession hit. They said, we need to stimulate the job creators, so we'll give them a $520 million tax cut over 5 years. These corporate tax cuts really had no substantial effect on improving our economy, but they did have the expected effect of decreasing the state budget by $500 million a year. That's just one example. In the last 11 years or so, there have been close to $5 or $6 billion of tax cuts, or I should say more broadly tax spending, that includes tax cuts, new exemptions to taxable income, and tax credits, which you're all familiar with if you've been following the Save Our Schools drama. So tax spending is the broader terminology for all these different ways that the legislature diverts money out of the general fund. And it's costing us. We don't have teachers in half of our classrooms who are certified to teach, and yet of all the responsibilities we have as responsible adults in our society, in our community, one is to see that future generations are able to make the most of themselves. But if you deprive people of public education, it's like an enormous social self-inflicted wound. So I feel very strongly about public education, and excuse me, part of the historical sense that I bring as an individual to this race is that my family has been here a long time. My great-grandfather and two of his brothers, so the three of these brothers were married to three sisters, and they all settled in the Phoenix area in the late 1800s. And the oldest brother was actually invited out to Phoenix in the early 1880s to help establish a banking industry in Phoenix, because Tucson and Prescott had them going. Phoenix was a new town. It was just founded in 1870, and it had no banking institutions at all. So this, I think that would be my great-grand-uncle, was one of the founding bankers for, I think it was the National Bank of Phoenix at the time, and the next year they changed the name to Valley Bank. I don't think it's the same Valley Bank that merged with J.P. Morgan Chase a few mergers ago, but he was very involved in the early 1880s with that, and then later in the 1880s became the territorial treasurer. I just learned that about a month ago reading a Journal of Arizona History article about early banking in Arizona. What I had known was that my own great-grandfather, the younger brother, was the territorial treasurer about 15 years later in 1902, 1903. His name was Isaac Marshall Christie. Anyway, I didn't realize this was a family project until after I started enjoying reading more Arizona history. But I think at least we share an interest in something that's really fundamental for our state, and that is seeing that we are good stewards over the resources that are entrusted to us, but also that we're thinking long term, and reflecting back on the Arizona that these forebears of mine lived in, and looking at the state constitution, which is now just a bit more than 100 years old. I've been thinking about the values that constitution represents. The values of, we want people to thrive in Arizona. So there was a real push, at least my look at this Constitution, in addition to guaranteeing public education for our residents, and then this additional provision about higher education, is that the people who founded our state really wanted to see people thrive here and make the most of themselves. And so, the protection of the state trust fund, which is one of the 13 or 14 pools of money that the Treasurer's Office manages, is a key piece of it. Overall, the amount of money under management is about $16 billion at the moment, and 6 of that billion is in the state trust fund. That state trust fund comes from the sale and lease of state lands, which the federal government granted upon Arizona joining the Union, and with strings attached. This land is for public education, K through 16, whatever. I don't think they refer to it that way in the day, but for different levels of education, that's what the state land trust is for. And you know, we had Prop 123 a couple of years ago. How many of you remember that? Mm-hmm. If you're voting against taking advances on the trust fund, which they did, this is part of our governor's attempt to settle, you know, he's taking ownership of settling this litigation that arose out of the legislature's failure to properly fund and increase funding for education. And it was in my mind, a horrible compromise, but a Hobson's choice for voters. Because if you wanted to support education, this is the only way you could do it, but it came at the cost of sacrificing the educations of people in the future. Plus, it involved increasing sales taxes, which happens to be the only way our legislature now can raise revenue, is by saying, okay, give it to the voters and put it on their necks, because we can't muster a 2/3 majority to do the job ourselves. I have to quickly add to that while I used to say that was an impossibility, now I have to say it's a near impossibility, because they did come up with the supermajority vote to increase the Prop 301 taxes for 20 years. It's just that the way they did it, when, you know, that Prop 301 tax, the 0.6 of 1 cent tax from 2000, set to expire, I believe, in 2020. Well, by the legislature having extended it itself, it's no longer bound to the same purposes as it was when it was a voter-protected initiative. So I think we've all learned, if we're paying attention, not to trust the Republican legislature to spend the money the way we ask them to. And we need to do more things to protect education. In this case, when I talk about Prop 108, that 2/3 majority, what I am recommending and suggesting and saying that I will work on as state treasurer is actually revisiting that and seeking to amend the Constitution again, either to repeal that provision in whole, or at least to create exceptions to those voting requirements so that we can properly fund public education, public safety, public health matters, instead of saying, well, we can't afford it, sorry, we're just going to have to take more people off of access and let them die, right? That seems to be one of the shells that Ducey is moving around to give the 9% pay raise to teachers. They're going to make eligibility for access more difficult. They're going to increase the taxes on rural hospital beds and move some other things around, but not create new revenue for the state to pay for teacher raises. So we haven't really solved any problems. It's, if he weren't a governor, he'd be called a carny for the shell game. Well, so that's the first big point that I wanted to talk with you about, is the importance of this failed experiment, and that we don't have to just accept it as normality in Arizona, that we should start rejecting that. You're starting to hear about a lot of these organizations raising awareness of this, not just me as a candidate. There's a Arizona Center for Economic Progress, which is kind of a subsidiary of the Children's Action Alliance. They're actually having public fora now to raise the same point that we have so over-relied on sales taxes as our main source of revenue in our state that we are now in the top 8, if not smaller number, of regressively taxed states. And it's the second area that I wanted to discuss with you is public banking. Have you heard about this?
Yes.
Public banking.
Yes.
Good, good. A few of you have. This is a social experiment, governmental experiment that comes to us from North Dakota. This one's 100 years old, but it's been a very successful experiment in the state of North Dakota. And the history of it is very interesting. The farmers couldn't get credit in frontier, what we'll call the late teens of the last century in North Dakota, frontier North Dakota. They couldn't get credit from normal sources, and their tax assets were being sent to Chicago or New York to be managed for them. And they said, well, this is crazy. That money never comes back and it becomes available to us in credit. We can't survive from one season to the next. Let's create a state-level bank that lends tax asset money through community banks and creates more credit availability. This model is actually relatively simple, and has seen North Dakota through the Great Depression. They didn't suffer the way the rest of the country did, and also through more recently the Great Recession, when our state, among others, was hit very hard with the crash of the real estate market. So the new governor of the state of New Jersey actually ran on public banking, and after getting elected and sworn in this year, they've already got legislation moving in New Jersey to investigate, evaluate, and hopefully implement a public bank in the state of New Jersey. Similarly, there's legislation pending in the states of Michigan and Alaska, and at the city level to do something very similar in a lot of big cities. San Francisco, Los Angeles, Santa Fe, St. Louis. I think you have to be a Catholic city to qualify, but no. Anyway, this is an idea that has legs, especially in light of the news we're reading about Wells Fargo and the consolidation of the big banks that has occurred since the Great Recession. You really get the impression they don't care about consumers except to exploit them. And public banks working with community banks like local credit unions and smaller local banks can actually be much more responsive and sensitive to the needs of consumers as well as to entrepreneurs. And the idea, if you have more credit availability in your economy, is that you can actually make a lot of action happen, especially in rural areas in a state like Arizona. So I think this has great merit. There's a legislator from Tucson, Pamela Powers Hanley, perhaps you've heard her name. She's introduced a bill that's modest in its aspirations to create a task force to study public banking and report back to the banking committee in the House so they can consider whether they want to do something about it and adopt a public bank. Well, what do you think has happened to her bill for the last 3 or 4 years? Nothing. This is the right answer. She can't even get a hearing on this bill. And you know that the banking interests are just going to keep it as dead as they can for as long as they can. It may have to be volunteer if there isn't money to pay for it, but we can move this idea along. And it has such great merit that I think as more people find out about it, they will endorse that idea. Just as the now Governor Murphy in New Jersey found campaigning on it in New Jersey. It's something that can help people. It's something that can also actually work against payday lenders and other folks who are kind of out to exploit folks who are in tough circumstances. So those are kind of the two main areas that I want to work on as your next state treasurer. I've told you a little bit about my background. As a candidate, I'm running as a clean elections candidate, and that means gathering up close to 2,000 of these $5 forms, and I see some of you have already, in spite of my speech, filled out the form, so thank you. And then also about 8,000 petition signatures. We are relatively early in our campaign still, so if you're familiar with clean elections, you know that besides petition signatures and the qualifying contributions, we're also capable of taking seed money contributions. Unlike the legislative and congressional candidates who are hitting you up for $5,000, our top ask is $160, and we're happy to have anything up to that amount if you're willing to help out beyond the qualifying contribution. The two things are separate, and you could do both, and we hope you will. But let me open it up to questions and see what you might have.
I'm impressed with your credentials and your ideas and your presentation. I'm unclear with respect to the office of State Treasurer, what autonomy you would have in bringing about some of these ideas.
The first one I talked about, dealing with Prop 108, is sort of twofold. One part of it is just being the adult in the room when they're talking about more tax spending. I'll use that term.
The legislature?
Yes, when the legislature and the governor. I mean, we have a governor right now who's a former state treasurer, right? And as state treasurer, he opposed the sales tax increase. So it was a big victory for the forces of anti-taxation. And then he campaigned for governor of reducing income taxes to as close to zero as possible. So every year of my administration, he said, we will have tax cuts. You haven't been hearing that much about it this year because he realizes there have been consequences, but my position is...
But I thought he was the education governor.
That's right. The so-called education governor. More than any other citizen in our state should have recognized the near impossibility or irreversibility of tax cuts and what they mean to our state budget. So having somebody from the democratic value side of the coin makes a big difference as far as having the bully pulpit to oppose tax spending. That's not a legislative job, I grant you that. But I think it's important to have a reasonable person there who's responsible and thinking about Arizona's future rather than the short-term political gains or economic gains for rich friends, which is sort of what this is all about. The other issue, the public banking issue, to implement might very well require legislative approval. But right now, the issue is dead on arrival because of the politics in the legislature. So I think the treasurer, just by virtue of this office, is in a fine place to push the idea forward and actually take steps, like I said, forming the task force, taking responsibility for generating more information and awareness about public banking, and then laying it up. If it requires legislative action, say, well, now it's on you guys to implement this. And there is if you're interested in this subject, there is a kind of an industry group that is promoting public banking called the Public Banking Institute. And they have a lot of good material on their website. I think it's just publicbankinginstitute.org. So please take a look at that if you're interested in the subject. Yes? I believe it's 13 or 14 separate pools are managed, and they all have different investment criteria that are normally along the lines of you may have so much in securities versus fixed income, like bond type investments, and they have to rebalance these portfolios. If there's a run in the stock market and the value of the securities goes up, they have to sell off some and rebalance so that they stay within those investment criteria. Something that happened in the late 1990s was that they loosened up I think the voters actually approved this. They loosened up the investment criteria for the state land trust so that it could get into riskier investments with higher return. That's always the equation, right? Risk and return. And so DeWitt, our recently departed state treasurer, who's now the businessman for NASA, as a stockbroker, took advantage of that. And we, if there is a board of investment that meets monthly that includes the treasurer and I believe the director of the Department of Administration and 3 or 4 other people. And they publish the results of the investment pools for the prior month and publish them in a pamphlet that is available at the end of the month. And it's also available for download off of the Treasurer's website. So you can see the mixture of investments in each of these pools. And there's a staff at the Treasurer's office. It's not a big office in terms of bodies, but there's a staff of individuals who are essentially the managers of the different pools. And then they coordinate with money managers largely on Wall Street for the management of the investments in those pools. The treasurer himself or herself is not executing trades, you know, but is the overseer and source of accountability for those staff folks. And like I said, it's a monthly review of how things are going. I attended the Board of Investment hearing last December as I was getting into the race to get a sense of what this was like. And there had been good growth in the stock market, and so they were saying, well, maybe we should actually sell off some of our stock holdings before year end, because a lot of other institutional investors who are balancing their portfolios will be doing it after the turn of the new year, when it's normally the next month when you look at your performance from the prior month, then you do the rebalancing. So I found that interesting, and it is an office that has to be very sensitive to the broader economy for obvious reasons.
Have there ever been, to your knowledge, attempts to invest a pool of money or a portion in a local, let's call it favored investment company?
You mean performing the way some of our legislators do?
It's not uncommon in some states.
Yeah, I'm not aware of that. It's a good question, and obviously every time there's a change of administration, there's an opportunity for review and audit, self-audit, and I would actually look forward to that. I'm kind of concerned about the migration to mid-cap and lower-cap stocks, which are the higher risk, higher return stocks, especially since the commander-in-chief just seems hell-bent on creating chaos and instability, and so you see the volatility in our stock market. It just seems like we need to get some more control over these assets than letting them ride this roller coaster. And I think that's where the public banking comes in, is that we can manage part of our house, take it away from that risk area. But I appreciate that question. I think it's a good one. Yes?
Yeah, a concern is running clean for a statewide office.
Yeah.
How are you going to get the word out so that you can get the number of votes you need to win?
I'm glad you asked this question, because it is a big challenge. There are 3 Republicans filed that I'm aware of for a state treasurer, and there are 2 Democrats, me and a fellow named Mark Cardenas, who's a young legislator from the west side of Phoenix. And Mark and I have gotten to know each other well. I think we respect each other, and we are both selling the program of Vote for Mark for state treasurer. Okay. In terms of meeting the press, the question was, why am I not sending letters to the editor or things like that? And actually, the stuff I've been writing for the Republic has been kind of reactive to the horrible editorials that they publish. I do intend to be writing my own position pieces and sending them for publication. So, yeah.
Just as a matter of information for you, in terms of the Green Valley Rita, we have an editor, Dan Shear, of the Green Valley News and Rita News. He will interview a candidate one time before the election, and therefore, if you get through to the primary, you might want to then
Touch base.
take the time to come down and have an interview. He tries to be fair.
There are some online publications, and I have clipping services set up on Google. You know, you can do Google alerts, and I see these articles every once in a while from Prescott, and there's some kind of online publication that just publishes puff pieces for Republican candidates, and you can't tell if it's an outright endorsement or they're just publishing whatever the candidate gave them, their mother. I mean, it couldn't be more flattering. But anyway, I hope that the Red for Ed campaign raises awareness. I'm in touch with some of the people who are the founders of that, and I was sort of a part of the planning committee for the Outlaw Dirty Money campaign before I decided to run for treasurer. And I hope that will succeed. We have this legislature that just seems to be hell-bent on denying Arizona voters democratic power any way they can, whether it's making initiatives and referendum harder to gather petition signatures for, or whether it's telling city councils, no, you can't do that, whether it's Tempe's disclosure laws or Bisbee's and Tempe's plastic bag laws, or any other number of things. I sure appreciate your hanging in there with me. I'm surprised nobody got up and said, I've had enough of this.
We had 100 people in this room, and they did leave.
That makes me feel so much better. Thank you. Yes, thanks again for waiting and for